Hi there, it's great to see you. Thanks for stopping by today. I'm John Merriman, and this is your Tuesday morning guitar song. I did a Simon and Garfunkel show earlier this year, but I thought that an artist with the stature of Paul Simon deserves his own show. So here we go. In 2006, Time magazine put Paul Simon on a list of people who've shaped our world. They didn't say musicians who've shaped our world. They said anybody. That could have been a head of state, it could have been a scientist, and that put Paul Simon into a very rarefied and select group of people. To me, Paul Simon is the confluence of three strong spiritual forces. I see in Paul Simon the soul of a master artist, someone who must express their inner visions and emotions. Plus, I see the soul of a master craftsman, someone who must create and build exquisite vehicles of expression, and in this case, songs. Plus, in the same body, I see the soul of a master novelist, someone who can observe and penetrate and analyze, and then put things into dramatic characters and move them around. These three rare forces came together in one person for me and created an artist strong enough to shape a world. There you go. There's your metaphysics for the day. Let's get down to basics. Well, what happened to Paul after he split up from Artie in 1970? That's where we left off last time. Well, in 1970, Paul Simon married a lady by the name of Peggy Harper, and they had one child together. In 1971, he came out with his first solo album, and this album was supposed to be the next Simon and Garfunkel album. It was mostly written, but at that time there was no Artie, so it came out just as a solo Paul Simon album. Then for the next couple of years, he released a few very successful solo albums with lots of hits. In 1975, he got divorced from Peggy, and he felt like he needed a new vehicle for creativity, so he chose the movies. He started writing the screenplay and the music for a movie in which he would star. It was called One Trick Pony. It came out in 1980, and it handed Paul Simon his first major artistic defeat. It was a flop. The critics ripped it apart, and that sent Paul Simon into depression with waves of self-doubt. He had writer's block for 2.5 years after this movie. And he finally got out of it with the help of a friend who was a counselor and a psychiatrist. Now, concurrent with this, in 1981, he went on tour with his old friend Art Garfunkel in a reunion tour, and they planned to release a new Simon and Garfunkel album at the end of the tour. Well, they were spitting and spatting their way through this whole tour, and the plans for the album were canceled when their relationship really went south at the end of the tour. The album was mostly written, so again, this album came out as a solo Paul Simon effort. Now, no conversation about Paul Simon in the 1980s would be complete without mentioning his marriage to Carrie Fisher. In 1983, him and Carrie got married. They were married for 1 year and then got a divorce. But after they were divorced, they stayed in relationship for 12 years. This was a love affair for the ages. It was deep, it was passionate, it was full of joy, it was full of pain, it was full of light, and full of dark. But it had many problems with drugs and mental health issues, and Carrie finally ended it after 12 years. But she was Paul's muse for the great part of that decade. Well, let's get back to the narrative. In the mid-1980s, Paul was given a mixtape of musicians from South Africa, and he just fell in love with it, and he wanted to record a solo album with African influences. His always supportive record label, Warner Brothers, said, "Oh, Paul, this would be career suicide. You're not doing this. Don't do it." Well, at that time, he thought his career was pretty much over. He says he was coming off a couple dud albums and still smarting from One Trick Pony. He thought he was pretty much through, so he said, "I've got nothing to lose. I'm going to go where I want and record with whomever I want to." So he went to Africa and he recorded with South African musicians. In 1986, the album Graceland came out, and that was one of the greatest pop albums ever recorded. It sold 16 million copies. It won every applicable award at the time, and it introduced the world to the wonderful music of South Africa. Then he went on tour with that, and then the decade changed. In 1990, he did it again with Brazil. He went to Brazil and recorded the Rhythm of the Saints album. Not quite as popular as Graceland, but still very well received. Well, along came the 1990s, and he wanted to try this theater acting thing again, so he set his sights on Broadway. He started writing the music for a Broadway play. This play came out in 1997, and it handed Paul Simon his second major artistic defeat. He put $11 million into this play, and it closed after 68 performances. By then, Paul Simon was mature enough to handle things like this, and he decided just to go back to his wheelhouse. He would release a high-quality solo musical album every 4 or 5 years from then on, and that's what he did. He's now 75 years old. He just released his 13th solo album last year. I just listened to it yesterday. It's fantastic. He sounds like a kid. He lives in Connecticut now with his wife of 25 years, singer Edie Brickell. They have 3 children together, and Paul coaches his son's Little League baseball team. Quite a career. And today, Paul Simon is the topic of your Tuesday morning fun fact. Here's your Tuesday morning fun fact. There's a woman of mystery in the life of Paul Simon. It is the mythic Kathy, who appears by name or by reference in songs throughout Paul Simon's career. This is the Kathy that appears on the bus in the song America, or the Kathy who gave her name to the song Kathy's Song that appears on the album Sounds of Silence. Well, this woman of mystery is a real person. Her name is Kathy Mary Chitty, and she and Paul lived together and were very close in England, where Paul was a folk singer, before Simon and Garfunkel became famous. They were planning a life together, and then the song Sounds of Silence became a big hit in this country, and Paul left England to come home. But he told Kathy that this would probably be a one-hit wonder kind of thing, and he would return to her in England when all this blew over. Well, it never did blow over. And Kathy had a real aversion to anything that resembled fame or being in the spotlight, so she disappeared from Paul's life. Well, journalists finally tracked her down, and she was living, and still is living, in South Wales with her family and 3 kids. But she is still very adverse to any type of publicity. So Paul was left with his broken heart. He was left with Art Garfunkel, and he was left with the great songs that he wrote for his first muse, Kathy. And that's your bittersweet Tuesday morning fun fact. Let's go back to 1973 to the album There Goes Ryman Simon. Please stay with me. I'll be right back. Thank you so much for coming along with me today. I had a great time, and it's always so good to see you. If you have a second, please like the show or like the page if you're watching on Facebook. If the Spirit moves you, please share the show on your social media. You are my word of mouth, and I appreciate everything that you do. Come back and see me next week. And remember, you're never ready for your day without a song in your heart. Bye now.